Hello and welcome to Perpetual Parenting. This podcast is facilitated by Life Fellowship Foursquare Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado. It comes from a series of messages shared by Pastor Derek Brown in 2024. Virtually everyone is parenting someone. Your own children, your grown children, your grandchildren, your aging parents, your coworkers, yourself. People aren't perfect. Therefore, parents aren't perfect. And we often find ourselves catch up parenting. It's a perpetual process. In part 3, called Everything Changes Except the Things That Don't, the world has drastically changed over the past couple of decades, and with it, a lot about being a child has changed as well, but some things will never change. Little humans need the same safety, love, and nourishment that they always have. It might look different now, but it's still needed. So whether you're a new parent, a seasoned parent, or just someone who's surrounded by immature adult kids, dig in as we learn how to serve them all better through perpetual parenting. Last week was week 2. I want to catch you guys up and remind you just a little bit of what we talked about last week. The big thing that I want you to get and that I want you to understand, okay? Parents that have children that they struggle with, this is key to your understanding of your child, okay? Children will rise to your expectations of them, so set the bar high. That's you. Children will rise to your expectations of them, so set the bar high. One of the first things that they taught me in Love and Logic when I was learning how to run a classroom and how to be a teacher that expects children to rise to a higher level was our body language. Okay, an example was if I walk up, say I'm a teacher, I'm walking in the hall, it's between classes, there are a couple of students fighting. If I walk up to the 2 students and I say, "Stop fighting," and then I wait there like they're going to keep fighting, they're going to keep fighting. But if my body language says, "Hey, knock it off," and then I move on, my expectation of them to move on will draw them to move on. Subconsciously, don't even have to think about it. It just happens. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone whose child doesn't do well in school, doesn't do well with the parents, struggles with everybody that they work with. They come and hang out with me, and they do just fine because they'll start to mess around, and I say, "Hey, that's not how we behave here. I need you to behave in a different way. And I expect you to behave in a different way because you are capable of behaving in a different way." And then I move forward. And the vast majority of the time, like 95+% of the time, that's it. And that kid is awesome from that point on. And I'm talking about in the suspension program. I'm talking about at the group home. I'm talking about at camp with kids from other churches. I'm talking about at vacation Bible school when that kid comes that doesn't normally come to church, but their parents were like, "Hey, free childcare." And they kick them out the car on the way and don't even stop. They're just like, "Tuck and roll, Junior." And because that kid's nuts. And that kid comes in and that kid is nuts. And I say, "Hey, we don't behave that way. I expect you to behave better because you are capable of behaving better." 95+% of the time, okay? Look, 65% of statistics are made up on the spot, all right? I don't remember, maybe it was 72, I can't remember, I'm making it up on the spot. But the vast majority of the time, when I have a child that is struggling to behave, expecting them to behave better, and making that expectation clear changes things, okay? So children will rise to your expectations of them, so set the bar high. Now, we talked about how more is caught than taught. Children will follow our example far more than they will follow our words. That is universal. That is something that we all know. The first time your 2-year-old says a bad word and it's one that you used 5 minutes ago, congratulations, you experienced that more is caught than taught. And then you spend the rest of the time telling the kids why they don't get to use that language. My excuse for my children is you haven't earned the right to use bad language. My kids' language is fairly clean, at least when they're around me, because they understand that Dad expects, curse words, if you will, are just language, and they're used to express certain feelings. I don't have any ill will towards them. I don't think that a curse word is actually a curse, okay? I think that intent has 100% to do with what a curse word actually is. We've talked about that before. But when my kids have said bad words, I say, "Hey, you've not earned the right. You don't have the experience to use that word correctly and in the right context." And so they don't. It works really, really well. it's a good conversation. I had an idea the other day because I do want to show you guys how to have a real conversation with a teen. And so I was thinking about asking Xander and Errol if they would be willing to have a real conversation with me one Sunday morning. Not today. I will prepare them, I will ask their permission, and if they say no, we won't do it. But I think that would be really cool. If my kids and I just sat here and we had a conversation about something real, and we all got to kind of see how that can happen and how you can have a real, honest, open conversation with a teen about something that they don't necessarily understand or that they have a very aggressive opinion on, okay? It'd be fun to do. My kids and I talk about a lot of things. That's something we talked about last week. Talk to your kids. Okay, so more is caught than taught. So we want to make sure that our behavior is leading our kids in the way that we want them to go. But we must lead intentionally, okay? It's not enough for me to do good things and expect my kids to see that I'm doing good things and understand why I'm doing good things. It's important for me to discuss my behavior with my children, okay? Last week we talked a little bit about how on a subconscious level, children look at mom and dad and they say, mom has to do such and such, dad gets to do such and such. And we were looking at how if dad goes to church, then the children are much more likely to go to church when they grow up. And that's ultimately because children look at parents and they say, okay, mom has to do this, dad gets to do this. Because as far as they're concerned, dad gets up, he goes to work, he comes home and he does what he wants to do. They don't see the sacrifices that dad has to make. They don't see the work that he has to put in. They don't see the struggle that he has to put in at work to feed the family or whatever. And so they think that dad gets to. They don't understand that dad has to unless dad tells them. So we need to have real conversations with our kids and say, this is real life. Mom and I both have to do these things so that we can have these things. My kids are often, at least in the past when they were younger, they were, Dad, why can't we play? Because I have to work. But you're always working. Actually, I'm not always working. Every other kid your age has parents that both have to work and both have to work full time and don't get to work from home. And so I had to talk to my kids and say that mom and I have sacrificed financial gain so that we could be home, so that we could raise our family in this way. But sometimes we still don't get to be who they want to be because sometimes there are things that we have to do. It's that if-then discussion, okay? Teenagers especially don't have the prefrontal cortex. The front of their brain hasn't cooked yet, and they can't function. They can't understand how now connects to later. They are incapable of understanding how now connects to later, which is why we take 18-year-olds into the military, because they'll do anything, because they can't connect now with later. But then we also take kids that age and we tell them, make mistakes. This is the time of your life to make mistakes. And then they do, because they can't connect now to later. And then we wonder why they're struggling later to make up for what they did before. And things aren't connected. I had absolutely zero work ethic until I was 25 years old. I was at work one day, I'm 25 years old, I'm sitting behind my desk at the suspension program at Volunteers of America in Sheridan, Wyoming, and suddenly I realized, hey, work doesn't suck. What happened? And I realized that I'd finished cooking, and I could tell that my sitting here behind this desk is boring as heck, but it allows me to do whatever I want after 4 o'clock. It gives me the freedom to live the way that I want outside of this 8-hour window. And when all of that connected, suddenly I was able to do things. And I was able to be a leader in a way that I couldn't before because I had finally finished baking, all right? So we need to lead intentionally because our kids don't understand what we're doing. They don't understand the connection between now and later, so we must tell them the connection between now and later. We can't just say, stop that behavior. Why? Because I said so. No, we need to have the discussion. If you stop that behavior now, or if you start this behavior now, it will feed you into the next steps of your life so that you don't have to deal with this later, or so you do have to deal with that later, okay? My daughter and I had a real long conversation about showing your work in math. She says, Dad, I do the first 3 questions. She's in algebra. Okay, she's in Algebra 1. She says, Dad, I do the first 3, and they're fine, and I do them perfectly, and then I do the rest in my head, and all my answers are right except 1. So why do I have to show my work? And I said, Errol, it's because when you get that 1 wrong, and we have to go back and look at it to find out what went wrong so that we can learn from it, there's no work to show, so we can't find where you went wrong, so we have to start over completely. And it's taking forever. She said, but Dad, of the 10 questions, I'm getting 9 of them right. Why does that one matter? I said, Errol, because it's my job to challenge you to grow and become better. And if you can learn to show your work now, it will feed you in anything else that you do. And she said, but Dad, I don't learn that way. I said, Errol, baby girl, I'm sorry about this. I don't care where she is. I'm speaking to the world. Love you, sweetheart. I said, Errol, this is not about a learning style. This is a fact of life. In any math, any science, any chemistry that you do, showing your work is vital. Knowing the steps that you've taken and knowing the steps that you need to take is absolutely vital. And she's incapable because she's 14. Her brain isn't done. She's incredibly smart. The brain being done doesn't equal unintelligence, okay? Intelligence is not part of the prefrontal cortex discussion. It's simply connecting my behavior with my future. Consequences. What are the consequences to this action? Okay? So my kids are both super, super smart, but getting them to understand that if you can learn to show the work now, it is going to feed everything you do for the rest of your life. They're incapable of seeing that now. It is my job to help them see that. Now, something else that we talked about last week, and then we'll move forward. When our behavior is wrong, as a parent-type figure, when our behavior is wrong, we must accept our wrongness. We must accept our wrongness, we must change our behavior, and we must make amends. For generations, for many, many generations, mom and dad were infallible. For many generations, the church was infallible, and you could not question a pastor. Did that turn out well? Anybody? Anybody like, oh, let's go back to the good old days when Derek would have been the one voice, and that would have been it. No? Well, it's the same with parents. If we get into a situation where our parents cannot be wrong, it breaks down our children in a way that stunts their growth, that keeps them from being able to grow, but it also keeps them from being able to have good relationships in the future. But if now, when we're dealing with someone that is the child to our parent, if we can accept when we've made a mistake, humble ourselves enough to apologize for it, and then change our behavior so that it doesn't happen again, we are setting up the next generation to do the same. And if we can set up the next generation to do the same, it'll just be rainbows and butterflies. No, it won't be rainbows and butterflies, but it'll be a heck of a lot easier, won't it? If we had a generation that was willing to accept their mistakes and make amends for what they did wrong, and then deal with it. I was on a thread the other day of it was just videos of Karens losing it, and it was hilarious. And sad, because there are so many of them. Like, how are there this many people that behave this way? There was this lady that was angry. She was losing her mind, screaming at this guy. And he says, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he said, ma'am, that's yours. And she stopped, and she looked at it, and it was hers, and she realized that she was completely in the wrong, 100%. Just reality smashed her in the face. Like a wrecking ball. You could see it smash through her head. It was just, she's like, and so she looks at him and says, you're a jerk. Left. Like, lady, you screwed up. Own it. All right, so if we can own our screw-ups to the people that we're working with, they will learn to do the same. And then instead of being people that fight for our wrongs and try to battle to make sure that the thing that I did that was wrong is actually justified in some form or fashion, if we can get past that, then we have people that are actually getting better stage by stage and step by step, that are becoming better people, that are becoming more forgiving and more patient and more kind. That's Jesus. That's something that we should all be about, okay? All right, so really quickly, a note about intentionality, all right? When we look at Jesus and the way that he behaved during his ministry season, we see intentionality across the board, okay? Jesus said, I'm not just here doing random stuff. I am doing what I see my Father doing. I'm doing exactly what my dad said. Everything that I'm doing on earth is for a reason and for a purpose, all right? So every step that he took, every word he said, every healing that he performed, every prayer time that he took, every rest time was intentional. Jesus was asleep in the boat for a reason. Did you get a chair there, William? I did. Sweet, thank you. I meant to grab you one earlier and forgot. In parenting, we must understand that our primary full-time job is parenting. I need you guys to hear this. This is incredibly important. It's something that I got a hold of very early on as a parent. One of the few things that I will tell you that I did right, okay? We have to understand that our primary full-time job is parenting. And everything that we do for or around our children requires intentionality. We must parent with purpose, okay? In my entire parent life, going to work has been the break. I get excited. I'm going to the office. It's quiet at the office. Forget you, Pam. I'm going to the office. Yeah. And I go, and I sit in the office for however long, and it's quiet, and the lights are off. And I work, and it's peaceful. And then I get home, and I sit in my car in the driveway. Not every time, but most days. I would sit in my car. Now I work from home. I don't get this, but when I used to go to the office all the time. And I would sit, and I would steel myself, because when I go home, I'm not going into a time of rest. I'm going to work. I'm going to the part that matters. Okay? Because the reality is, if I lost my job, if for some reason I couldn't work, there's going to be a new person there within days. My job is going to be filled. I'm not that important there. But there's nobody filling my space at home, and my space at home is my number one priority. So I steel myself and I walk in the house because I'm going to work. That's not to say I don't take 10, 15 minutes or whatever to just kind of center. Sometimes if I've had a hard day, I need to kind of find zero again. But last week when my kids were out of town, I had so much free time. And I couldn't figure out why. And then after like 3 or 4 days, I realized my kids aren't here. I spend way more time with them than I think I do. Just playing games and talking and doing projects. And because they weren't there, I had hours in a day that I wasn't using doing other things. We don't go to work and then come home as parents. Home is work. It is the primary thing. If you don't have a paycheck tomorrow, you're still a parent. And you still have to be there for your kids, and you still have to be teaching them, training them, guiding them. Okay? Our real job begins when we get home. So, back to what we were talking about today. From generation to generation, a lot changes, but several things are universal. These are basic human needs, okay? Number one, children need safety. They need boundaries. This is universal. This is across the board. Okay, so I think I mentioned this last week. A kid that's in public school might have gotten in trouble for whatever reason. They often get in trouble during their free period, between classes, whatever. Then they come to my program. It's a very rigid, very scheduled program that they can expect and that they know and can expect everything to happen on the clock every day, every time, and they thrive. Because in their life, they don't have boundaries, and when they find a place that has boundaries, they excel, okay? How many 17, 18-year-olds do you know that are just wild, and then they join the military and just straighten right up? It's because if children don't have proper safety, proper boundaries, proper guidelines, they're incapable of flourishing. Some kids do okay, but by and large, we need something guiding us. And if we don't have that as children, we need to find it as adults. If we don't find it as adults, we tend to just kind of ricochet around like a pinball. Now, let's look back at this dependence chart from last week. So healthy, age-appropriate boundaries create a feeling of safety for a child. Even if they don't like them on the outside, they will fight the boundaries because that's their job, all right? The kid has to know that the boundary is still there. So they will walk up to the wall and they will kick that wall hard to make sure that it's still there and that they are still safe. And this is not something they do consciously. This is subconscious. Why do we have the terrible twos? because they can walk and they're learning to talk and they're testing every boundary to make sure that they are safe. So, what do our boundaries look like? At 2, don't touch the stove, don't stick keys in light sockets. That's about it. Some of us have not done well there. It's okay, grace for you. Your kid's hair is just spiky naturally now. It's fine. 3, 4, 5, we have expectations, okay? You have to do some chores, take out the trash. Maybe not take out the trash, 5 is a little bit small. Xander was doing dishes at 5. He was loading and unloading the dishwasher when he was 5. That's good there. You still have a bedtime because you need to have enough rest. You still have the amount of television you're allowed to watch is very narrow, and the number of shows you get to see is very narrow. But as they grow and as they get older, the boundaries are widening, but they still need to be there. Xander took his driving test yesterday, and it's fine. We were at Matt McCracken's house yesterday morning, and I threw Xander the keys, and I said, all right, I need you to drive the truck out to the highway and then up that 100 yards and then back into Matt's driveway because we were out behind his house. And so for the first time, Xander drove on a real road, and I was like, it's a highway. It's super wide. He's not going to go more than 25 miles an hour. He'll be safe. He totally was. My expectations of my children are well-based. But his boundaries are getting wider. But he's still got boundaries. He's still going to have to learn within a safe structure. He still has to take the classes. He still has to do. He's not just like, hey, you have a permit, you're free to go. There's still boundaries. And children need that all the way up. And our 17, 18-year-olds need that too. Our 19, 20-year-olds need that too. But because our 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds don't have those boundaries because our situation is you're 18, you're free, do what you want, they have to learn to make those boundaries themselves, or they're going to make mistakes that they have to deal with later on. And I think that most of us in here can remember that time. Most of us that are above that time can remember that time. Now, in this phase, up to maybe 5 years old, most kids have a security blanket. Yeah? It's maybe it's not a blanket, maybe it's a stuffed animal, maybe it's a pacifier in the shorter numbers there. But safety blankets don't really go away. They just change forms. Okay? This is kind of a side note, but it's something I want you to hear, especially if you're dealing with teenagers or young 20s at your work, or maybe nieces, nephews, whatever. Okay? I want you guys to understand that as we grow older, we still need that safety. We still need something to hold on to, something to gravitate ourselves towards. And so the security blanket changes, but we still have one. A lot of times it's just a much larger blanket and it lives out on the couch, but it's still there, okay? But what I want you guys to get, and I want you to understand is, for the last 2 generations, the safety blanket has become the cell phone. It's not necessarily bad, it's just real. It's information that we need to understand. Because when we're dealing with our 18, 19, 20, 16, 17, whatever, these young people that are coming out to work and they can't put their phone down, it's not because they're inconsiderate, it's because they're gravitating towards their safety blanket and they just haven't learned how to put it down yet. So it's not, we don't need to be getting mad at them for doing this thing that is very natural. Because I mean, like seriously, how many of us reach for our phone in every moment of silence? Like a lot of us, right? It's silent, reaching for my phone. How many of you reached for your phone more than once during this message alone? I'm not hurt by it. I understand it. Because our brains switch, they run around, they gravitate towards this thing. And so rather than get angry at this generation for, they have no work ethic, they just keep picking up their phones. I hear that argument so much from people that are trying to lead this generation. But if we realize that is their safety blanket, then we can work with them and guide them and speak to them in such a way to help them understand that you can put that down for the next 2 hours, and at break time you can pick it up. And it'll still be there. Your boyfriend, your girlfriend, the messages will still be there. You can answer them then. Your social media will be there then. And we can teach them, we can train them, and we can guide them to grow up and to mature around this safety blanket situation. But what we need to realize is, what happens when you try to take Linus's blanket away? If you say, you need to grow up, and we jerk that blanket away, what happens? We get a fight, right? The little kid fights. We try to take a pacifier away before a kid's ready or without a process. It's a fight. It's a battle. It's the same with this generation and with these young 20s and late teens. If we simply just say, you can't have that, it is a subconscious personal attack. And you will have a fight every time. So, as the adult that can see today from tomorrow and can understand the consequences of what I do today and how it connects to my future, what if instead of saying, you can't have that, you need to grow up, we have that different conversation. We say things like, that'll be there in a couple hours. If you help us, if you put that away and you focus, we can get this done, and then we can come back to work. It's a very simple change in language. It's a very simple shift in language that instead of trying to jerk someone out of a state that they have lived in their entire lives, we are guiding them to walk out of it on their own. Make sense? Moving on. All right. I had a verse there about safety. Psalm 57, 1-3, have mercy on me, O God, have mercy. I look to you for protection. I will hide beneath the shadow of your wings until the danger passes by. Our need for safety is universal. Doesn't go away. Go to that next picture there, Matt. We all need protection in some form or fashion. Sometimes it's our home. Sometimes it's our vehicle. Sometimes it's our bedroom. Sometimes it's, everybody has somewhere, something where they go to feel safe. And when the world doesn't feel safe, that's their home. That's what they go to. We all have that. David had that. He wrote this. David, the leader, the guy we're supposed to kind of look at and be like, more like that guy a little bit. Only in the one way, though, not in the other way. Don't be like David in the other way. Just in the good one. All right. Second thing that doesn't change, loving and healthy touch. Children of all ages need loving and healthy touch. Okay, even your kids that are touch me nots, the kids that are like, do not put your hands on me ever, need healthy touch. But it looks different for them, and it comes with permission. May I hug you? May I put my hand on your shoulder if they're not your kid? If they are your kid, then you have a different relationship, and that side hug might be exactly what they need and all that they need. My son, Xander, if you've met him, you know that he is 100% touch. His love language, if that's even a real thing, I've heard, anyway, it doesn't matter. Shouldn't have said that. Xander's love language is touch. He needs hugs all the time. Hug me, hold me, whatever. Always. Since he was a baby, he just always, and he, like when he was a little baby, he wouldn't like cry until you picked him up. It wasn't inappropriate in that way. He just always wants to be held, hugged, touched, loved on, so that he physically feels loved. Unless you pinned his arms down. If his arms were pinned, kid would lose it. Most babies, if you swaddle them properly, they like this feeling. It makes them feel like they're back in mama's womb. They're warm, they're comfy, they're okay. Not Xander. Xander slept like this, with nothing on, just when he was a little baby. So touch is important, but it's got to be healthy and it's got to be specific to the person, but we need that. I generally don't like to be just touched. But specifically, I don't like to be touched when I don't know it's coming. I used to be, I would be at church on a Sunday morning, I'd be working on something, putting out a fire, whatever, and I'd be walking through the sanctuary and I would get hit by Xander. And he would stop me from moving. And I would lose my mind. Because you don't just stop me. Don't just grab me, don't just touch me. All you gotta do is say, hey, Dad, can I? And if it's a good time, I will say yes. In fact, if any of you have asked me for a hug, I have probably said yes. And you're like, oh, Derek doesn't like hugs. He's not going to want to hug me. No. I'm absolutely about hugs when they're done appropriately and they start with a may I. I absolutely love that. You hug me without a may I might drop you to the floor. Not intentionally. I just have this subconscious thing where if somebody like hugs me from behind, that's going to happen and you're going to go over. Loving, healthy touch. Now, Errol, on the other hand, when she was 2 or 3, she's an amazing kid, always has been. She's got a couple idiosyncrasies, like she never goes to bed, ever. When she was like 2, we would put her to bed at 7 or 8 or whatever was appropriate, and she would be up till 11 playing, and we could not. So we let it be. But every now and again, her behavior would just tank. And for like a day or two, she would just be angry and grumpy and frustrated and just surly as little 2-3-year-old Errol. And so what I would do, she's not a touch me kid. She likes a good hug. But what I would do when Errol was 2, 3, even 4 or 5, like say it was a Saturday morning, I would grab her, I would put her in the chair with me, I would wrap my arms around her, and we would watch shows for a couple hours. And that healthy touch would change her behavior. And it was like the anger melted away. And when we were done, her behavior was good, and she would behave appropriately moving forward. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Those are 2 examples from kids that I know really well. But it's true. We need loving and healthy touch. Now, when we're talking about our older people, the late teens, early 20s type people, maybe parents, if they have been through trauma, what is healthy and what is loving changes drastically and becomes much, much, much more personal. So we have to communicate, okay? Now, as we're talking about parents and we're talking about this situation, we're going to look back at Luke 15:20. This is the story of the prodigal son. Verse 20, the prodigal son returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion, ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Okay? The embracing and the kissing in this context, culturally appropriate. The kissing in our culture, maybe not so much. Maybe the adult son that's just coming home wouldn't want to be kissed by dad in our culture. But the picture remains the same. We have a picture of our Father God showing us how to be a good father, and that good father embraces his child, welcomes his child home, celebrates his child. Okay? In John 13:4-5, we see Jesus. Okay? This is the night of the Last Supper. So Jesus got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on in this scripture. Jesus is doing a whole lot of things. Culturally, that was appropriate for someone to wash someone else's feet. It should have been the servant. In my culture, if you touch my feet, I might stomp on your hand. Because that's a touch me not space. Like, leave my feet alone. I had rough problems with my feet when I was a kid, and ever since then, I don't like people touching them. That's not going to mean anything to me. But what we see here is Jesus taking not only a servant role, but physically washing the dirt off of his disciples' feet. And so in both of these scenarios, we see God with a loving, appropriate, physical touch to the people around him. And our children need that. I heard someone, I can't remember where it was, but when it comes to babies, you cannot give them too much time. You cannot spend too much time holding a baby. A newborn baby up to like a year old or something, holding them too much is not a thing. We say that holding them too much is not a thing, but that's only because we want to protect our time. But as a parent, if I realize and recognize and walk into the fact that parenting this child is my number one, setting this child up for victory is my number one, then I can't hold them too much. That's not to say you have to hold them 24/7, but that is saying if they want held, they probably don't feel safe and need to be held. And you can do that, and it's not going to wreck your child to hold them too much when they're little. And as they grow, it is not going to hurt them to hold them from time to time. Okay, Errol is 14. From time to time, she will still snuggle up with me on the couch, and I hope that she always feels comfortable snuggling up to me on the couch. That happens less and less often, but she still does it. And when she does it, I know it's because she needs it. And so she has that physical touch between dad and Errol that is healthy, that is appropriate, that is life-giving. Moving forward, quality time. Jesus spent virtually every spare second he had with his Father. Jesus was always doing what the Father said, and when he wasn't doing what the Father said, he was talking to the Father or sleeping in a boat. To be honest, I mean, we got to be realistic. Dude needed to sleep. Intentional quality time is vital. Okay? Our quality time if you are dating someone and you are looking at getting married, and all you ever do is go to the movies and sit quietly and watch a movie, does your relationship grow? To a degree, but not fully, not completely, not to the depth that a husband and wife relationship is going to need to be. Our quality time with our children has got to be intentional, and it's got to be something that draws a relationship out of them, that draws them to mature, that draws them to become more than they were, okay? One of my favorite things to do with Errol, she's my road trip buddy. So last fall, I went to Gillette to kind of escort my mom home after my sister passed away, and then I went to a different funeral in Rapid City. Errol came with me just for the road trip. Just for the road trip. And we watched every Ghostbusters movie that was out at the time. And we talked. It was 6-7 hours to Gillette, 2 hours to Rapid, 5 hours home. And we just talked. And we ate snacks, and we shared the things that we enjoy together. Now, Errol's got a dark sense of humor that matches mine. I'm quite proud. I think I told you guys before, I let her, when she was littler and Jurassic World came out, or maybe it was Jurassic World 2. I think it was Jurassic World 2. We're sitting in the theater, she's with me, we're watching the show, dinosaur rips a guy's arm off, the theater was quiet, and I hear Errol go, that's my girl. Got me in the feels, I cried. I cried at Jurassic World 2. It was a touching moment where my little girl laughed because the guy lost his arm. So we have this we have this thing in common that we share in this dark humor situation. And every now and again, Errol will say, Dad, can we watch this movie? And I'll say, Errol, that's a romantic comedy, and I would love to watch that with you. I love that movie. But romantic comedy is you and your mom's thing, and I need to stay out of that quality time. I need to not rob you and your mom of that quality time. I need to stay in my zone. I need to be intentional about the time that I'm spending with my daughter. Errol and I will watch all kinds of other shows. Weird, creepy, off-the-wall stuff. That's our thing. But her and her mom have a thing. I need to stay out of her thing, but I also need to be intentional that I'm not just spending time with my kids watching shows, but that we're talking about them. Xander and I have spent more time talking about video game world and structure in the last 4 months than ever before because he finally got me interested in it a little bit. We started building a bed war in Fortnite, and we became a team in a way that we hadn't before, and we started talking about and strategizing in ways that we hadn't before. And so we're having these conversations about game structure, okay? And I realized everybody that just tuned out when I said game structure, come back, it's important. Come back. We're not talking about game structure. We're talking about the real conversations that spawned from that conversation. Because if my children will talk to me about anything, if I'm spending quality time with my children and they are talking to me, we can talk about anything during that time. Good Lord, I'm sorry, guys. All right, intentional quality time is vital. Don't just sit by them, talk to them. Share things with them that they value. Finally, encouraging words. Matthew 3:13-17, real quick. Jesus went from Galilee to the Jordan River to be baptized by John. John said, hey, you're supposed to baptize me, not the other way around. Jesus said, it should be done. You have to baptize me. It's the Father's plan. In verse 16, after his baptism, as Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, for everyone to hear, this is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy. We are walking around in a new generation that has never heard this from a parental figure. My generation seldom heard this, mostly never heard this. The generation before me never ever heard this from a parental figure. But God very clearly says this is important. God wouldn't have done it if it wasn't important. He wouldn't have spoken about Jesus in that way for the world to hear. I tell you guys how great and amazing my kids are, not for your benefit, but for theirs, because they deserve it, because they're amazing, and because they're great. Are they perfect? No. Do they have attitude? Absolutely. Are they still on the anvil and I'm the hammer? You know it. But they are amazing. And when I tell you that my daughter can run this church, it's because she's been doing it for 14 years. And she can. When my son gets to lead worship, it's not because he's the pastor's kid, it's because he's done the work. It's because he's put in the time to know what that is and how to do it, and he's got a relationship with Jesus that allows him to do that in a way that is appropriate. I've had so many parents come to me and say, my kid is terrible. And I say, when was the last time your kid did something good? And they can't answer it. And I have to broaden the question. No. When was the last time they did anything good? When was the last time they were playing by themselves appropriately? When was the last time they picked up their socks after they took them off and put them in the wash? When was the last time they did anything good? And they can't remember. And I say, okay, here's your challenge, mom or dad. For your child that is terrible, you are going to encourage them 4 times for every 1 time you have to correct them. For a week. For a week. You are going to compliment them. If that means thanks for putting your plate in the sink, if that means thanks for getting out to the car on time for school, if that means thanks for playing quietly in your room, whatever it is, you are going to say 4 positive things for every 1 correction you have to give your child. And see if it doesn't change their behavior, and it changes it 100% of the time. 100% of the time, because our children rise to our expectations. And if we expect that they're a terrible child, and if we expect them to get in trouble, they will 100% of the time. But if we start to draw the gold out of them, if we start to call out the good, if we start to point out the good, if we start to tell them how they're a good kid when they're a good kid, and when they're making bad choices, we don't call them a bad kid for making bad choices. We say, hey, you made a mistake, and this behavior isn't acceptable, but you know what? Tomorrow's a new day, and we can get up and we can move forward and we can learn from it and we can become somebody new tomorrow. And we start calling the gold out instead of pointing out the trash. The world points out the trash real well. Anybody can point out the trash in somebody's life. It takes a heart of God to pull the gold out of somebody. And if you can give your child more praise than you give them correction, their behavior will change. I guarantee it. I don't guarantee much. I will guarantee this.